Hello, Nivya, and welcome to She Supply Chains.
Thank you for having me here. I'm super excited for our conversation.
Same. We've been looking forward to this. So, one of the ways we start always is helping our listeners understand a little bit more about you. So, could you share about yourself both personally and professionally?
Totally. So I'll start with personal and then I'll work towards my professional. What do I do for work? Personally, I've been married to my boyfriend turned husband for about 14 years now. And I have a 5-year-old son named Logan. He's starting kindergarten this year. So it's a big year for us. I also have an almost 1-year-old Labradoodle named Daisy. So we're figuring out, we just got her like 2 months back. So we're still figuring out how to coexist inside our house, but having too much fun this summer. Professionally, I'm a commercial and a supply chain person. I started out being an engineer, so I'm an electronics engineer by trade. But over the course of 4 years, I realized while I liked engineering, I was really more curious about the business side of things. How would a product be made? Who sells? Who's willing to buy? What should the price be? So that naturally took me over to the business side of things. I started out my career in the commercial side, both in sales and marketing back in India. I started working at JSW Steel. That's the largest steel manufacturer in India, about like 30 billion USD in size, I believe. Fast forward, that's really where I got the experience more from a supply chain lens on what's really needed behind the scenes to actually get the product to where I needed it to be, and how do we actually coexist and make all these functions talk to each other and work together. 15 years later, fast forward two continents, I'm right now a partner at A&M Alvarez and Marcel, and most of my work focuses on corporate and supply chain transformations for mid-sized company as well as bigger companies, which are mostly Fortune 500 at this point. So that's a little bit about me.
That's amazing. And so, Nivea, you kind of talked about this. So you started out in commercial. So how did you know supply chain was for you and it was something that you enjoyed?
I didn't. I was just when my customers started yelling at me on why the products didn't show up, or I truly understand when the product can show up when they need. That's when I started investigating more into supply chain to see how does this all really work once I've sold something, right? Let's understand and how do we make it seamless. And that's really, it was fun. It was painful when I was actually going through it for sure. But post that, it's been fun learning experience, just, doing all the work behind the scenes. Because as a customer or consumer, you barely recognize that there's so many things that need to fall in place
Hmm.
for you to get what you need, right? For us as a consumer, all I do is get on Amazon app. I'm like, okay, it's 1 day shipping. It's a 4 day, 10 stops away from my house kind of a visibility, but there's a whole lot of ecosystem processes behind that actually enable that, right?
Yeah.
That's fascinating and complex. So I enjoy doing that.
All right. So you are pulling up to school, you're meeting the parents for kindergarten. How would you describe, they say, what do you do for work? So how would you describe it?
It's always tough to describe what I do for work to people who don't do consulting. So the easiest response I've learned over time is helping companies design, make, source, plan, and deliver their products. That's really what I do. Usually one of these five nodes end up breaking, and that's when they usually call me for help.
Mm.
Mm,
And companies, and that could be like, the shelves are empty with products, so we have too many products, help us be more profitable. Or it can be we can't find the right ingredients or right raw materials given all the stuff that's happening globally, things of that nature. That's usually when I get plugged in.
All right.
all right. So, kind of coming back to like you talked about how you started out in engineering originally. How has that technical foundation maybe influenced you? It sounds like you were drawn to the business, you want to understand more, but how has that technical foundation maybe influenced your approach, I should say, to solving like enterprise problems, especially for like Fortune 500 supply chain companies?
Yep. So as an engineer, people often focus on the technical side of engineering, right? But what it really is, according to me, is you put all the parts together in a system, but it's really about how those different parts talk to each other, or how do you get them to work together to actually enable that, right? It's
Hmm.
not as simple as just throwing all the ingredients and voila, we have a recipe that's worthy of a Michelin star, right? And that learning is really something that I use even now, a lot now actually, on the business side of things, because it's seldom one specific problem. It's like a ball of yarn, right? The minute you start discovering something, it leads to some other problem within the business, often in other areas of supply chain or in commercial or across functions, right? That to me is the what I would call it as an engineering mindset, really understanding what's the root cause behind problems so that you end up solving for the root cause as opposed to the symptom. And how do you evaluate as a not just sum of parts, but interaction of parts within a system. To me, that's years. That's how I've started learning what truly is the engineering mindset versus
Hmm.
who could I been if I just started out in business.
I do. I appreciate your story earlier of what I'm hearing from you is, I think some people, when you get in the commercial, it's like you get yelled at and you're like, and you kind of say, okay, supply chain people fix it, but you took a step to actually go learn and figure out the details of it and understand what are the different levers. So I just appreciate that perspective. And I think from an end to end commercialization process, I think supply chain professionals can do more to learn the commercial side of the house as well, because we always want people to understand our side. And why it's so hard and why it's so difficult, but I just hear that in your answers, and I appreciate that kind of learning and curiosity. I think we should encourage that more and as we think about working cross-functionally. Okay,
Totally.
so you've spent years in, we say, digital supply chain practices, and so right now we're all talking AI, advanced analytics. How do you help clients kind of move past the hype and really understand value in those buzzwords and those tools?
Yeah, sure thing. I hope the conversation has moved beyond where can we possibly use AI, just given like similar to what you're probably seeing in your feed. Everything is an AI, right? It's almost like if you don't have AI in your posts, it's outdated or you're outdating yourself, right? But to me, when I have these conversations with the clients, a lot of them are in similar boats, right? There's a lot out there. They don't know what their competitors are doing, how much should they be doing, how much faster should they be doing. But it really boils down on what are some decisions or processes that can benefit from better data, better efficiency to drive better outcomes. That really should be the conversation. And if AI can help that, great. If AI cannot, then let's go fix the processes.
Mhm.
That's how I would frame any, like, when folks ask me, what are some use cases? What have you done with AI? I, personally speaking, I would start with, okay, what are some tasks that I don't really enjoy doing? What
Mhm.
are some tasks that I can benefit with, like having a thought partner to actually bounce off ideas, to refine the thinking, to also
Mm.
get more expansive in like the data that we use to think, right?
Mhm.
And those are that's how I would like apply that thinking lens to business problems. On if you look at it from supply chain, replenishment is a great example, right? You need a person, like how hard is it for a person to actually track the truck delivery, know how much should be sent between DC to DC? Can that be done by an agent, right? Things like that is how I would guide folks to think through. At the end of the day, humans are amazing at filling their own time with other things to do. So it boils down to, I wouldn't talk. Yes, AI helps with efficiency, but it's more about changing the processes to make sure you're doing the right thing with the freed up time, or you're focusing on the right things, which are enabled by the agent or AI in general.
We've had a couple of guests now, and it's like a similar, I think, thread there where I think people want to be productive. And so, just like you said, they fill up the time with things. And it's like, okay, but if we remove some of these things, like there's actually higher level work that you could be
Mhm.
at and
Exactly.
doing, and that won't go away, but maybe you're not even getting a chance to get to it right now.
Exactly. And it's a human behavior as well, right? You think like you ought to do something for 40 hours and then suddenly you see 20 hours just disappearing and you don't know how to do it, or you think you're going to be getting on
Yeah.
the list, right? So you start filling it up with other things or creating new problems that didn't exist yesterday, right? It's about changing, I would say, driving the change top down. Leaders set the precedence on this, right? Saying less is more, focus on the right things, make sure that drives the outcome, and anchoring it back to the outcomes is probably how I would advise my clients to think about it.
Okay, so as you come in and you're advising clients and you're trying to get them to think more like end to end, I think one of the things that where we can struggle in supply chain is thinking in silos instead of thinking end to end, even across like even beyond supply chain and all the way from like, customer to the very beginning. You've had a lot of experience at A&M, Deloitte. What do you think is like one of our hurdles to truly integrating problem solving across an enterprise?
It's a great question. My perspective on that is the metrics and incentives. Because again, putting myself in the shoe, right? Bigger question. I mean, the question would be, what am I being tracked for? What should I be tracked for so that I know how to orient my work and activities to make sure I perform well against that KPI, right? And then how are we incenting me to do the right thing, right? It really boils down to that. And At the risk of oversimplifying, it really boils down to that. Where I've seen a lot of clients and companies get tripped up a bit on that is starting along this journey, but setting metrics in silos, right?
Mhm.
Planning probably shoots at forecast accuracy. Manufacturing is probably having schedule attainment or schedule, adherence and things of the nature. Sourcing goes for cost per unit, right? But then as you can see, there's no end-to-end supply chain metric here, right? So all you end
Mhm.
up doing is sub-optimizing in silos, and collectively you're probably worse than where you started, right?
Mhm.
So how do you actually make sure while each function has some amount of responsibility or a metric that they control to influence, how do you actually identify the right metric cross supply chain? A cost of ownership could be a good metric, or customer service level,
Mhm.
or the cost to serve, things like that, right? Which really cuts across the functions. That really helps break down the silos to your point, right? Make sure we measure the right things. We also allow and give the opportunity for functions to work together.
I would say I hear about metrics and misaligned metrics or competing metrics and how we are incenting people and their behaviors. That's probably a common thing Katie and I've heard over the last couple of interviews that we've had, like
Mhm.
something that's still a big opportunity. I say
Opportunity.
inside a supply chain and then don't think about doing a cross functionally. I think whoever solves that problem is going to make a lot of money for sure.
Hopefully me in some time.
So, Nivea, you work across a lot of different industries, and while they're very different, what is one universal truth about supply chain that you've seen apply to all of them, specifically in like a post 2020 landscape?
You probably have heard this in your past interviews as well. If you were to ask me pre-COVID or pre-pandemic, where I said disruption is rule, like I would have written an article about it, evaluating the resilience of supply chain and stuff. But beyond 2021, it's almost become ironically day to day, right? It's like every day is a disruption of something or the other, that it's become the new norm. So if you were to ask
Mhm.
me right now, I would say expecting volatility, expecting disruption in your supply chain has become the norm. And it's less about anticipating what's going to break, right? Nobody could have predicted any of the wars that started.
Mm,
Nobody could have predicted like what else might happen anywhere, right? But it's more about the agility portion of it, right? How fast can you react to it? How fast can you say, okay, this happened, great, let me go do something else that's gonna help mitigate, right? That's really where the evolution is happening with my clients, at least in supply chain. That's changed over the last 4 years. Earlier, it would have been like, get the forecast right, plan it once a
Mhm.
month, make sure everything, ticks and ties, and let's pray to God that everything works fine, right? But right now, it's just more about assuming that there will be disruption. How do you plan fast? How do you react fast?
that is one too where, we've been talking a lot about, like, how do you think through different scenarios almost
Mhm.
and have, like, ready to review. I don't know if you're seeing anything like that, like, almost like risk mitigation plans,
Mhm.
because it's just like you said, like, we don't know if everything's gonna come,
Mhm.
and so how do you kinda have at the ready, like, if this, then this,
Mhm.
without trying to have, like, 1,000 scenarios?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's where the AI comes in place as well, right? Like how
Mm,
you can, even if it's 1,000, it actually helps. If all 1,000 are justified, it actually helps run those 1,000 way faster than a human could have done. And then gives spits out the insights pertaining to the top three scenarios, right? So that way, to your point, you're still simulating all the risk at various nodes, but you're not wasting your time or your team's time.
That's a good idea.
that's a
Yeah.
great idea.
Yeah. I do struggle with because I think everybody's now, to your point, Nivea, understands that we're going to be disrupted. It's not like it's every day. I do struggle with even as I think about the day to day. How many scenarios? How much time do you spend on what could happen? Especially when you think about, third tier suppliers, like, because at least I think in my world, a fourth tier supplier can really take you down, even if the spend isn't high. And so sometimes I think we struggle with really how to do that risk assessment with much more complicated supply chains, how hard it is to go across borders and countries different, than before. So that is something that is top of mind for me for sure.
Totally right. And you're right in terms of there's a fine balance between having the ability to run scenarios and how many scenarios is too many scenarios that you're in this loop of analyzing but not doing something, right? And that happens as well. But to your point on disruption itself, I recently worked on this engagement. It's fascinating. The topic of dual sourcing came up, and like end tier supply visibility came up, and one of the things that we were like kicking around with was this concept of digital manufacturing or additive manufacturing, So there are like few companies and like marketplace out there that actually, if you give them a design, they can make the product depending on the dimensions and tolerance, like within like few hours.
Mhm.
So we're thinking of like, as you think about the traditional way of thinking, like dual sourcing or multi-sourcing, this was more of like having a partner for disruption, right? It's like call them only when your lines are stopped for whatever reason, you're out of parts, there's an MRO need, things of that nature. I thought that was a interesting new way at looking sourcing or having an optionality, right?
Mhm.
Taking your supply chain. So it's getting, I mean, people are getting creative for sure, right? And I don't believe anyone is like solved it all, but there are pockets of innovation that's happening to address this impromptu or spontaneous disruption, so to speak.
Very cool. I love seeing like how much AI is like helping run through these different like options and models.
Totally. My
Yeah.
life right now runs on AI. I have like a couple of engines and like I've been
Me
trying to
too,
actually.
Nivea. I'm like fully in. I'm fully obsessed.
I
I love
just
it.
I just learned from Courtney. I'm like, I'll give that guy a go. Let's
I mean,
try it.
I think what you said earlier for me, I really enjoy is like a thought partner and to just like bounce ideas and learning how to prompt to get just I don't I get I that really connected with me because yeah, one doing the things that I hate like personal email and God, yeah, all that, but also just like having someone like an agent to like help you problem solve and think about things in a way that I know I personally wouldn't all the time. So,
Okay, so again, you get to see this is what I do appreciate about consulting. You get to see so much across so many different companies. What is a really critical problem that you're seeing across that people are really trying to solve right now? And then what's your perspective on also across well, let me start with that one first. Like what is a problem that you're seeing a lot of people that are just like trying to solve or figure this out right now?
One of the problems I'm seeing is active portfolio management.
mm,
Not to say the other problems, which has been there for a few years, like cost takeout, so optimizing for your margins, when revenue doesn't exist. Those are also like front and center of execs' mind. This active portfolio management seems to be resonating with a lot of my clients recently, just given, again, a consequence of COVID, right? Or post pandemic, I should say. During pandemic, a lot of companies in like consumer facing industries released a lot of new products because all we were doing was had a lot of disposable income, spent a lot at home, experiencing, experimenting with a lot of products and snacks and things of that nature. From a business lens, if you actually translate that, what that meant was too many SKUs, new formats, that we're not selling, but we were creating and throwing things at the wall because there was some customer buying that elsewhere, right? Now, 4 years later, with all the GLP-1 and all the other things that's happening with the protein craze, people are not eating as much or consuming as much as what we probably did during pandemic, right? So there's a big complexity problem in terms of having a long tail of SKUs, which I'm sure being in supply chain you guys are not like unfamiliar with, right? Creates a sheer volume of complexity in your supply chain planning processes, manufacturing, cost of goods sold, everything. There are probably a few pieces that are truly making money for the entire portfolio. And the push is, it's not really SKU rationalization, right? And this is where coming from a commercial lens, to an extent, I'm wary of proposing SKU rationalization because at the end of the day, consumer is the king, right? So
mhm,
we don't need to sell what they want and what we think they want, right? But there's a fine balance between how do you actually actively manage your portfolio to focus more on the things that are growing so that you
mhm,
pour more money in it, either promote more, increase format, manage the assortment differently, while also trimming down the complexity so that if there are some, if there are some fires to put out, the supply chain teams know which areas to focus on, right? So that you're not spread yourself within across the entire like 1,000+ SKUs, right? So that's a topic that there's been a lot of conversation on how can we grow the ones that are truly growing while
mhm.
also optimizing the cost on the ones that are likely not growing.
So Nivea, you don't have to name names unless you want to, but what companies are like really doing this well? Or what industries when you think about portfolio management? Because I would say that's like an evergreen problem as I've
hmm
seen. So is there any like company or like industry that's really doing this and not as one-time events, but just how they do their work?
Unfortunately, I wouldn't say there's one single industry that's cracked it. The closest example I would say is actually retail, like Amazon.
Oh, okay.
Somehow, like think of it this way, right? Any SKU that's actually selling more, they give blasts on promotions on your app, or they make sure it's available that can get shipped to you within few hours. And they want, it's a slight nuance on how they're actively managing their catalog almost, but then you do see a push for the towards the customer to move them towards more of those, do I need this, am I eyeing this, Do I want to, click buy versus things that are like longer tail, will get to you in a week, place orders if you want. So in their own way, they're managing portfolio, but again, it's a retail company, right? They don't have a portfolio. The other way that I'm seeing that some of the CPG companies are managing is the volume of M&A deals. If you've
Mm,
noticed, there's a lot of activity on like carve outs, acquisition, integration.
yeah.
There's just a sheer volume of food and bev related deals, especially in the last year. Those, based on our understanding, are happening because of either like, the synergies or potentially the long tail categories and things of the nature, or even
Okay.
growth.
All right, perfect. Okay, so now that you've stepped into a managing director role at A&M, how have you changed your focus from managing projects to how you kind of shape the industry?
That's a great question. Been thinking of that recently as well on like how has my life changed, right? To me, I think there's been like certainly a pivot towards more relationship building. It's
Mm,
always there. It's not like I wasn't focusing before, but the magnitude of that is certainly much more as a partner right now. As a non-partner, the focus was more on delivering the projects, maintaining the scope, making sure the client is happy, still solving the problem and making sure the client is like, happy with the end product, but not as much as how do I become the trusted partner to the client? Why would the client actually call me to brainstorm something to help him or her think through some problems before it actually becomes a project or a need that I can help them with, right? That's the space that I'm trying to grow into. How do I make sure? And this is not like one day I wake up and I'm like, oh yeah, I need to do this and tomorrow I'm going to be better at it, right? But that's my new goal in terms of how do I position myself to be the trusted partner to my clients.
mhm.
So that they see value in honestly calling me, right, and brainstorming and me being their thought partner so that I can help them think through before it, results, or even if it doesn't result in any material projects on my end.
All right.
And then I kind of like a follow-up question on that one too is as you've moved into this role, right? Like you obviously you're up another level. How are you finding like so you're talking a lot more about like building relationships because people have to obviously you said you're like, I want them to trust me, I want them to call me as a thought partner. How are you seeing too? Because again, I think this is the cool part about being in consulting is that you get a chance to see again so many different companies and industries. How are you also like maybe helping shape things across these things without I mean you don't want everybody to be obviously exactly the same and everybody has the same problems, but are you also able like the flip side of that is like you could positively influence a lot of different things or different approach or thinking about things, anything like that come to mind for you too?
Me, it boils down to using database objective decisions or discussions, right? Because to your point, I do see a lot of industries. I speak to a lot of my clients, ex-clients across different areas or different parts of the industry as well, right? Couple of things that stand out to me are connecting the dots across the problem because it could very well be the same problem manifesting itself in different ways across industry. And every client, like my client is listening, don't pay attention to this, but every client thinks they're unique, right? And they're like, no, we're unique. This process is different. Our secret sauce is different. But then after having done this for 15 years, it pains me to tell, no, it's not. It's the same problem, right? And like, you can simplify this and solve this. Yes, there are some nuances that need to be still customized or ought to be considered for your industry, but you're not that unique after all. And having those conversations and having the trust to have the conversations is the key, right? To your point on like, how do we actually get ahead of those problems? Because sometimes, like, just having seen many versions of it, it helps us
Mhm.
identify, okay, this I think is going to manifest in the
Mhm.
problem that we saw 2 years back and things of that nature. The second would be just connecting the dots and like just going back to the enterprise thinking as well, right? Often, if you notice, even in like some folks who specialize and even within consulting, right? The minute you end up becoming a functional person or start thinking along only in a certain silo, that influences how you think and how you problem solve, right? And the minute you take those artificial barriers out of your brain and start thinking end to end supply
Mm,
chain, end to end enterprise, that really opens the opportunities up for like creative problem solving and how do you actually go after the problem that's causing all these issues.
all right.
Okay, so we're moving into I know this is like flown by. We're gonna move into our final part of the interview. We haven't asked this one in a little while.
I know.
I know. This is one of our favorite questions. We call it hero, hardship, or highlight. So a hero is a person who's inspired or encouraged you. A hardship is maybe a difficult experience that you learned something about yourself through it. And then a highlight is a positive achievement or a proud moment.
I'll start at the top. If I forget, you may need to remind me
Yes.
again.
Okay.
I idolize Indra Nooyi. I don't know. I certainly haven't met her, don't know her at all. But based on what I've read about her, I've read a book and stuff, I respect her. She comes from a background which is very similar to mine, and she actually grew up in a city which was like 2 kilometers from where I grew up. So oddly super similar. And she came here as an immigrant, went to do her MBA, and was tremendously successful. So I really look up to her on how she balanced work and life, or work life integration, I should say, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Um, and then in addition to that, how she, coming from a different culture, navigated the systems here and was tremendously successful in her own way, right? One
Mhm.
of the things she mentioned in a book was assuming positive intent. I want to say it
Mm.
was a dad or mom, someone who instilled this in her mind on, like, when you evaluate all your interactions, especially in a new country or at any given setting, right? It's very easy to assume negative intent, and that
Mhm.
just like drains your energy and makes you think everyone is out there to get you. I go down some of those spirals myself, right? But then pulling myself out of it, like when you think, okay, everyone assuming positive intent on my end, what can I do about it? And that really opens my brain on how I evaluate these interactions, and how can I engage the positive momentum and the folks around me to actually get me to my goals, and also help them get to their goals, right? That stuck with me a long time. I mean, she's my hero. So
Oh,
anything,
I
even if
love that.
Love that.
I
she's
will
pretty
tell
cool.
you, I was having this conversation with someone else. I had like a not great interaction with someone, and then I just decided to approach them differently from my end. And what I received back was so different. It made me question, like, okay, maybe I was a problem, but I don't know. But I do think there's something about just saying, okay, you know what? Regardless of how I feel or what I feel like I'm receiving, I'm going to approach it in a positive manner, and I feel like it really changed my interactive in perspective, and that individual now shows up very differently than I thought, you know?
I think it makes a big difference, like, when you assume positive intent. Because here's the thing, let's just say they're part of that 1% that is trying to do you wrong. Let's just say. Even if you approach it with positive intent, like, 99% of the time they're not, and you end up with maybe a
Right.
different interaction, and at the end of the day, the 1% that is maybe trying to do harm, it comes out. Like, it
Yeah,
comes
that's
out,
so
like,
true.
but it comes out maybe in a more productive way without, like,
I
I know
also
for me, I'm
think
like, "Ah," and
we
I'm
put
like, "Oh, no,
we
I'm
put
gonna come
people
in
in
with
boxes
intent,
too,
assuming
right?
positive intent." Yeah.
Where, like, they make
Yeah.
have a bad day. I mean, we all have them, or, maybe didn't show up well, and then you're like, "Well, they just are." You put them in that box. I was gonna say a bad word, but then you realize, like, okay, maybe they were just having a bad day, maybe they had a bad week, or maybe somebody had something going on. Like, to your point, there might be those like one or two that you're like, you know what, maybe you just aren't nice, and that's okay. But generally, I don't think that's. Sorry, we're like way
I
off
don't think
topic
most
from
people
your.
are like
But anyway, okay, thank you. I love that
For a
story.
second, I thought you were going to go the Taylor Swift way, or like, "Hi, it's me. I'm the problem." When you started off
Yeah.
with that.
Can I just say, on a Taylor Swift note, the level of, like, hate people have for her, it is really strange to me. Like, the internet and so upset about her wedding, and I'm like, okay, regardless of how you feel, it's just weird. It's just like a strange I'm like, the
again, giving away energy instead of just,
giving
like,
away
assuming
energy, the
positive
person you
intent.
want,
Yeah.
she's not thinking about us at all. Like, at all. It's like, I'm like, you raging on Instagram, it is like the strangest thing to me. I don't know why I was like, wow, like, people feel very strongly. I'm like, this is like an interesting, like, there has to be some kind of psychological something on that. Cause I'm like, wow, like, they have put her in a box and they're like, you are not.
Mm-mm.
I'm
Yeah.
like, she's just getting married, living
Yeah,
her life.
mine is all positive.
Yeah. Okay.
Hardship. Hardship is likely, it's probably more cultural. Just given going back to my story on like just moving across continent, and for context, right? My first language in India was English. So it's not like, I know a lot more people like find it very difficult to pick up another language and communicate in that. My challenge was more on, I was used to Indian English, and when I moved here, I realized words don't mean the same thing here, right?
Mhm.
And what I'm saying is truly not what I'm thinking in my mind, and like the message was landing differently and like just adjusting, and goes both ways, right? And I've now learned what my colleagues call us Minnesota nice and things like that, right? Like trying to really understand what people mean and also
Mhm.
understand what they could be perceiving from what I'm talking, right? And adjusting the language. I think that was probably it was harder than I thought it would be.
Mm.
It was harder because I thought I was really good at communicating in English, so it was harder to accept that okay, I'm not all that good and there's still so much more way to go, right? But I think that probably taught me a lot in just understanding people and developing that EQ and just reading. That's helping me a lot in my career. What was a third age?
Highlight.
Oh, hard moment. I think this is recency bias likely, but I am extremely proud of making a partner recently, just given all this while, I've never seen anyone who looked like me, and there are not too many people, not to say I'm the first, but there's not too many women at the top leadership position who also have a family, right? And while I didn't let that discourage me all this time, because I was like, well, this is a great opportunity, right? I can finally be that first person to do that,
Mhm.
right? So it motivated me in different ways, but I am proud of the achievement and all the people who along the way believed in me and supported me, sponsored me in many capacities, right, to get me to where I am, being part of A. And even better is like I love that I'm finally in a position to actually influence and have a say in shaping the policies and processes at A&M and even within the industry, right? To bring other people along and be that person that I was looking for like 10 years back when I started, right? So really happy about that.
It's amazing.
Well, congratulations. It is a huge
Yes,
achievement.
congratulations. You should feel very proud of that. All right, this flew by. That's crazy. We're done. I know. Thank you so much, Nivya. This has been so great. So great to hear your perspective and hear your journey.
First, I love this opportunity. So thank you so much for having me over and sharing my thoughts.